Joining us, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, former commanding general of U.S. Army Europe and MS Now military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, former Secretary of Defense and former CIA Director Leon Panetta joins us as well. David, I want to get to you with the reporting. There are questions today about the $25 billion number that the Pentagon gave the House yesterday about how much this war has so far cost. Why are there doubts about that number?
Both Democrats in the House and the Senate think it only covers the munitions that were fired. These are the very costly munitions that were shot at drones and ballistic missiles coming from Iran. They think it's much higher. And one of the issues, this came up also, that we have been told by Democrats on the Hill that there was a lot more damage on American bases than Pete Hegseth made public today, that many more American aircraft were hit and many more facilities. And most tragically, there were 6 members of American forces who were killed in an attack by a drone in Kuwait. One of the survivors there has said there wasn't enough protection for them. So this is just a key flaw, possibly, is that these very, comparatively cheap drones, the Shahed drones from Iran, they cost about $20,000 to $50,000, kept getting through American defenses, killed those 6 Americans, and may have caused huge amounts of damage that we don't know about yet.
General Hertling, one of the claims that was made was on the munitions stockpile here in this country. Pete Hegseth said it was in really good shape. Is that accurate accounting from your understanding?
I don't believe so, Katie. And while he was saying that at one moment, he was also talking later on about the fact that they have to exponentially increase the amount of ammunition that we have in the stockpiles to make up for what has already been considered. Now, of course, he blamed it on the past administration and what was used in Ukraine. Some of that is truthfully hyperbole. But when we're taking a look at what he said across the board, it really went from some unique subjects like the size of the budget. And by the way, it was interesting to me that Secretary Hegseth said at the end of the briefing when he was addressing Senator Kelly that the budget was actually $1.53 trillion. That's different than what's been reported in the past. It's different than the mid-range of 1.5, which is an awful lot. But there were some very interesting dynamics, not only on the size of the budget, but the operational design of what's going on in this war, the strategy, the objectives of the operations, the tactics. It ranged all the way from Senator Peters talking about Clausewitz, which, by the way, I wrote an article on in the Bulwark yesterday, and it seemed to be reflected in what Senator Peters were saying, but also Senator Jack Reed at the very beginning, who is probably the most informed member of the SASC. He's a West Point graduate. He spent years in the service, and he knows the military like few others. But there were some very good questions across the board on the operations, the budget, Ukraine issues, performance of the military, war crimes. It was very fascinating and much more subdued than yesterday's testimony before Congress.
Yeah, at times. I mean, he did also continue to say the Democrats were the biggest problem and the biggest threat. I want to get back to the $1.4 trillion budget in just a moment. But first, MS Now political contributor and Punchbowl News co-founder Jake Sherman joins us. Jake, I teased at the top that you would be able to tell us about whether the War Powers Resolution makes an accommodation for a ceasefire. Tomorrow's day 60. The president is supposed to come to Congress tomorrow for a resolution to continue fighting this war. Hegseth said it was paused because of the ceasefire. Is that true?
Well, on a panel with Leon Panetta, who was defense secretary, I think I'm probably the least qualified to answer this question. I think there's I don't think it's entirely clear, to be honest with you. We wrote a story a couple weeks ago in our newsletter that Republicans were increasingly leaning on the 90-day timeline instead of the 60-day timeline. There, Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican for Pennsylvania, has another resolution which explicitly says any clock is paused effectively for ceasefire talks. The fact is this, Katie. The War Powers resolutions kind of all fall along the same lines. They fall along party lines. And the real leverage, if Congress has any leverage here that they're willing to exert, it will only come, in my view, and this might be controversial to say, but I don't really care. This is the reality. Will only come when this administration comes to Congress and says, we need more money to continue to prosecute this war. The White House has told me many times in the last couple of weeks, they're not going to come for this money unless hostilities have ceased. So they seem to understand that dynamic too, which is they don't want any sort of strings attached to their ability to continue to conduct this war. So, Congress for a long, long time, Katie, said this to you before, has been ceding power to the executive branch on matters of war and peace. And it's harmed them in the long run. And this is it's coming to a crescendo now, I would say, more than ever before.
So is the president worried that there might be some Republicans who do not grant him the authority or and if you're talking about strings on the authority, what are those strings and what Republicans should we be watching for?
Well, if the administration comes to Congress to ask for a supplemental, there is certain 100%, I would say, to be an effort to restrict how the president can spend this money. Whether Democrats do it in the Senate, Republicans do it in the House or in the Senate, I don't know the answer to that. But there are enough Republicans who are war weary and will want certain restrictions on how the money is spent, how the war is prosecuted, et cetera, et cetera. I have to imagine that is something the administration wants to avoid. But you could look down the line. I mean, there's a lot of Republicans who have expressed skepticism about this effort. The open-ended nature of this effort. I mean, we saw this with the Iraq war or with Afghanistan or with any conflict that the United States has been engaged on. When the administration asks for money, Congress has power. The Congress is the only entity that could give the administration more money for this effort. So with that money will come strings, almost definitely.
All right. Defense Secretary Panetta, I will ask you the question regarding the War Powers Resolution and whether the president needs to go to Congress tomorrow. Jake said, he deferred to you, so you have the floor.
Well, look, I think it's time for the Congress to step up and be a check on what's happening. I mean, right now we're stuck in this war. And nothing's happening, and there's no clear strategy as to what to do. Each side is blocking the Straits of Hormuz. Each side is paying a price for that. Iran is paying a price. We're paying a price because of dramatically increasing fuel costs. And so it's doing nothing but hurting both countries. So ultimately, there's got to be a strategy here as to how to end the war. And Congress, very frankly, has been AWOL in terms of standing up and saying, wait a minute, we do have under the War Powers Act the authority to basically say we are going to authorize what this administration is going to do in this war. And they should do that. They should do that. And they obviously have the power of the purse in terms of the funding issue. We've seen that happen in the past, and they definitely will address the funding issue and how the war is being authorized. And so there are a lot of checks here, but very frankly, the Congress has to step up. We're at the 60-day limit right now on the War Powers Act. Congress should take action on that in order to indicate that it has a role to play and send a message to the administration that if the administration wants further money, if the administration wants further action, they're going to have to come to the Congress.
I'm sorry, I'm about to sneeze, so forgive me for touching my nose. The MS Now doesn't have this reporting, but Axios has it, and it's particularly significant right now because if there is a resumption of hostilities soon, that would only mean that Congress should have the authority to either approve it or not approve it right now. Axios is reporting that the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Bradley Cooper, is briefing Trump on Iran options right now. These are two sources who spoke with Axios. A short and powerful wave of strikes on Iran to break the negotiating deadlock, taking over part of the Strait of Hormuz to reopen it to commercial shipping that would include ground operations. And the third option, special forces operation to secure Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium. So, Secretary, do you think any of those right now, given the stalemate that we are in, are wise options?
Well, I think that the White House and certainly the military leaders understand that putting any boots on the ground or continuing any military action is not going to be supported by the American people. It's not going to be supported by the Congress. And so the idea that suddenly we're going to go back to war in order to ultimately arrive at some kind of solution here is crazy. So the issue is going to be, what is it going to take? I mean, the president himself has said so often, within a couple days, we'll end this war. Within a couple days, we'll end this war. You can't end the war unless you're negotiating. And right now, each side has decided they're waiting for the other side to blink. It's time for negotiations. It's time for the president to send representatives to Abbottabad to meet with Iran and negotiate on the Straits of Hormuz, negotiate on the issue of nuclear and how to limit the nuclear capabilities, and negotiate on sanctions. That needs to be negotiated. That's the way it works. It's not just going to happen. You can't throw a few more bombs at Iran and expect that that's going to work as well. What you got to do is negotiate and come to an agreement to end the war, period.